Welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 29, Anne Lisbeth by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as the rejections of the diamond in the rough. Let's start off with the summary, where I'll digress on the most highlighted points and also make some reflections or add some additional information. Then we'll talk about my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in society today and the parallels, giving examples by a documentary and a film and another documentary. Then we'll finish off with the trigger points, which I consider to be positive and negative. Uh, Based on today's episode, I think unfortunately they may be a little bit more negative than positive, but let's hope for the best. Okay, let's begin. The rejection of the diamond in the rough. Anne Lisbeth is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen about an elderly poor woman named Anne Lisbeth and her daughter Karen. Despite being hardworking and honest, Anne Lisbeth is unable to escape the poverty and is forced to live in a small cottage with Karen. I digress. This is vintage society. No matter how hard you work, the less fortunate can never get out of the ditch of poverty. Anne sacrificed her life for the Count's children as a nurse, with whom she had a daughter or son with. In a more detailed summary, Anne was a really beautiful woman who gave birth to a daughter who was unattractive. I digress. Anne must have been desperate to find a family that could look after her and take responsibility for a child she couldn't afford to raise. In another version, Anne has a boy child that was considered an ugly looking brat. Really? I think any child who was neglected by its mother and played second fiddle and had to play second fiddle to the Count's children she loved so much would be a bratty in nature. I digress. This child must have been a terrible and a burdensome reminder of a failed relationship she had with the Count while she became the substitute mother to his children. Reflections. Anne Lisbeth can be interpreted on several levels, touching on themes such as societal values, the consequences of personal choices, and the power of redemption. I digress. We always have the power of our choices, but I believe we choose not to take responsibility for them. This is why so often we call for redemption, because we know we had the power to take another route, but decided to do otherwise. Maybe to do what was more convenient for us. She left that child screaming for love and attention with employees that bullied him. Societal values and priorities. The story highlights the dangers of valuing material wealth and social status above genuine human connections and responsibilities. I digress. If we are coming from a place of desperation, we will befriend anyone that can show us kindness, even if it's lacquered with poison, or forsake our values to feel included in society. Anne Lisbeth's pursuit of higher social standing leads her to neglect her own son daughter, a decision that ultimately brings her guilt and sorrow. I digress again here, people. As an elderly woman and single parent, it must have been difficult for her to have lived in a society that that, that disregarded the downtrodden, similar to how it is today. Back to the story. One day, a wealthy couple offers to adopt Karen and promises to give her a better life. Anne Lisbeth agrees to the adoption, but soon learns that the couple has ulterior motives. They mistreat Karen and force her to work as a servant in their home. This reminds me of the well intended Australians, what the well intended Australians did to the Aboriginals in Australia. They took them in and they used them as servants. And in 2009, I think it was just after Barack Obama had been inaugurated, they apologized to the Aborigines in Australia for abusing them and treating them as slaves. Reflections, consequences of personal choices. Anne Lisbeth's choice have far-reaching consequences, both for herself and her son. By neglecting her son, she denies him love and care, guidance a parent should provide, eventually leading to his tragic death. I digress. Imagine not being loved by anybody and being bullied. And that's how the son in this version or the other version was regarded. He was bullied, he was hated because he wasn't good looking and he had an arrested development. But you know, and I know that children can look ugly when they're younger and turn into beautiful swans when they get older. Anne didn't love herself, so she couldn't possibly have loved her son. What a horrible existence this boy had. I believe God took him out of his misery at the right time. Her choices also haunt her later in life when she is forced to confront the reality of her actions and their impact on her child. I digress. Her choices haunted her. Was this from the eyes of society bearing down on her? Because it certainly wasn't God. I think if she knew how to repent, she would have. God wouldn't have judged her. Continuing. Desperate to save her daughter, Anne Lisbeth seeks help from a witch who promises to grant her wishes in exchange for her soul. I digress. This desperate and unfortunately guilt-ridden woman makes a deal with the devil, leading to a bad omen. She was poor. Anne Lisbeth agrees to the deal and wishes for her daughter to be returned to her. However, the witch tricks Anne Lisbeth and steals her soul, leaving her to die alone and unloved. I digress. Just like her daughter did, karmic retribution, reaping what you sow. However, her son meets with a horrible death at sea, and she tries to save him at the 11th hour after years of neglect, but it was too late. She ends up burying her own son with her bare hands and dies alone and unloved. Reflection. The story highlights the plight of the poor and the vulnerability of those who are taken advantage of by the wealthy. It also warns against making deals with supernatural forces and the dangers of desperation, which is so true. When we're desperate, we'll do anything. I'm sure she was sorry for what she did, but her desperation led her down the wrong path. Overall, Anne Lisbeth is a tragic tale that explores themes of poverty, social inequality, motherhood, and morality. I digress. This also describes the continuous themes of inequality in society today between the rich and the poor, where the middle class is shrinking. The difference today is that we have psychological tools to help us to create a different reality than what Anne could. She was driven by her desire to elevate her status while quietly disposing of her child in the hope they would have a better life. She was also ashamed of her own child. Her desperation made her even more vulnerable, which led to a tragic end for her family. The final conclusion: motherhood and responsibility. The story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of embracing one's responsibilities as a parent. I digress, even if we don't want to. The moment we become a parent, our lives serve as an example to our child's life. It emphasizes that a mother's love and care are irreplaceable, and that neglecting these duties can have devastating consequences for both parent and child. This is so true, people. But what if that mother doesn't love themselves? They can't show love to their own child. I'm not making up excuses for anyone, but I'm just saying, if you don't love yourself, it's very hard to love your own child. And it's so easy for neglect to replace that inability to love. Now for my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in society today. This is such a heartfelt fairy tale because it touches on so many themes a single mother has to deal with in today's modern society and 2 centuries ago. Just think, if women, even with the welfare system today, are still struggling, could you imagine how truly impossible it was for Anne with no social infrastructure? And I'm sure her son, who is suffering from what they call arrested development today, and also back then, might have been considered mentally handicapped, i.e., a special needs case. Either way, I named this episode The Rejection of a Diamond in the Rough because I believe her son or daughter, but it's a son I'm referring to now, had qualities that had not been discovered, and that Anne didn't have the patience to wait and see what her child would grow into. You know, when you have a child, it's a growing, it's art in progress. It doesn't happen straight away. They don't turn into this beautiful swan straight away. It's a process, people. So let's take a look at some of the examples I have used to frame my critical review. The first one is a documentary film filmed in Austin, Texas. It's really amazing, and I'll read the digress before I get into the body of the piece. That I digress. We always have the power of choices, but I believe we choose to not take responsibility for them. This is why so often we call for redemption, because we know we had the power to take another route but decided to do otherwise, maybe to do what was more convenient for us. She left that child screaming for love and attention with employees that bullied him. Now I want to go into the documentary because it was just so amazing and it left a deep impression on me when I was in Canada. and still today. This documentary film I saw during Pride Week in Canada was heart-wrenching. It's centered around a man in his mid 50s who claims to have like an alternative lifestyle and dresses more like a woman. He lives on the street in various ways and has a lethal addiction to alcohol. However, Austin, Texas is his real home to him. Born into a family of alcohol addiction, he was the middle child who was horribly abused by his father and I believe sexually as well. His mother wasn't strong enough to stop it, although she added as a part of the abuse too. The other children, I believe, experienced abuse, but he got the brunt of it. The documentary follows him around from place to place and finally delves into the root cause of his demons. He has a tragic motorbike accident where he kills a deer and lays unconscious in hospital. His once stoic mother appears and demonstrates genuine, deep concern and love for him and waits for her son to wake up. I will call this man George because I can't remember his name or the name of the documentary, but it was so amazing. The destruction of a child and adult scarred by a lack of motherly love, emotional nurturing, and tender loving maternal care is the root cause of George's journey downhill. Neglect and abandonment played an important part too. The father's abuse had an effect as well, but the mother's withholding of affection and her weaknesses is what drove George to the hard edge of destruction. And after that, he's got about 5 years left in the documentary, and they follow him around, and you can see that his life is just spinning, spinning out of control. Even when he leaves the hospital, he's never he took on the role of his mother because he says his father was just absolutely terrible. So he related more to being and acting more like a woman because he felt that was the better half of who he was or who he is, and also his mother. He loved his mother in a way, but I think he was really disappointed that she just didn't support and stand up for him. And then he dies because he died at the age of 60, and they name a day and a street after him in his honor because he was truly, truly an amazing man. I think he was deep down just a very deeply wounded child, just begging to be healed and loved. And nobody was able to replace that except for his mother. But the damage had been done. And I don't think she even repented or just said, please forgive me. Let's start again. None of that. I think if she had done that, it would have helped him. It may not have completely stopped the bleeding, but it would have helped him. The next one is about a film, and it's called Riding in Cars with Boys. And I think I can't remember, Drew Dra- uh, Drew Barrymore is that plays the lead. And let's take a look at the digress first. I digress, even if we don't want to, the moment we become a parent, our life serves as an example to our child's life. It emphasizes that a mother's love and care are irreplaceable and that neglecting these duties can have devastating consequences for both parent and child. Well, I believe this is true. And riding in cars with boys is a perfect example of this, a film. It's actually based on an autobiography. Um, in 2001, the film was made. It's an American biographical film based on the autobiography of the same name, Beverly D'Onofrio, about a woman who overcame difficulties, including being a teenage mother who later earned a master's degree. The movie's narrative spans the years of 1961 to 1986. It stars Drew Barrymore, Stephen Zahn, Brittany Murphy, and James Woods. It was the last film directed by Penny Marshall, although the film is co-produced by Beverly D'Onofrio. Uh, Many of its details differ from the book. Okay, so let's take a look at the film. Beverly is the daughter of a policeman who wants to grow up too quickly. She wants to go to college, but her path is interrupted by an untimely pregnancy by a man she meets at a party that plays a hero to her, and he becomes the father of Bev's son, Jason. Bev is disappointed that she's given birth to a girl, but she accepts her fate. Ray, which is the father, Jay's father is a heroin addict and loses a lot of money on his habit. He proves to be not a very reliable father. Bev becomes bitter because her life has become complicated with a child. I mean, she's a teenager, for goodness sake. She doesn't want to have it, to have this type of responsibility of having a child. She wants to just do what she wants to do and be a teenager. She isn't sure she loves she isn't sure she loves her child and blames the son for problems and choices. Yes, this happens a lot. You have a baby, or you maybe manipulate the father to get you pregnant, and then you have this baby, and then he or she becomes too difficult to manage, or the responsibilities are too much, and then you start blaming them for everything under the sun, which is not fair, but we do this. She can't take responsibility for her choices, especially when then when they have been made for a child and father she never really cared for. Maybe if she cared for these two people, she'd be more willing to take responsibility, but she's not willing to take responsibility for them. The relationship between mother and son is disjointed and stiff and is lacking in any genuine affection. Jason considers Bev selfish for not wanting to help Ray with his drug and financial problems, and Jason runs away with his girlfriend to escape his cold and distant mother. Well, in 1986, Bev and Jason are driving to see Ray, the father, and she has a college degree and needs Ray to sign a waiver to publish her memoir about her life being a teenage mother. Jason calls his now girlfriend Amelia with bad news, who is dejected but not angry. Arriving at Ray's trailer, Bev explains why they are there when his wife Shirley demands 100,000, because after all, they're going to be in the book, so she wants to make money. Bev storms out. Jason follows, calling her selfish for only caring about her book. When he finally got to see his father again, he accuses her of being a bad mother and stomps off. Ray tells Jason leaving was the best thing he could have done for him. And that is why he turned out so well. He signs the papers for him. and he sneaks the signed papers to him, and he signs it. Jason finds Bev, who insists she was a great mother who sacrificed everything for him. He reveals she is proud that she has his best interest at heart in life. Feeling responsibility for her mistakes and poor choices, she gives him her car to drive to Indiana, okay, where he really wants to study. And she doesn't want him to study, but she doesn't want him to study in Indiana, but she decides he has to have his own life. And since they've mended fences, it's a good thing for him to get that independence. But I thought that's a really good movie, even though the movie isn't quite as detailed and to the point as the book, but it talks about this struggling mother, and it's a good example, really, because the father then turns around and says, "Look, the best thing about you, Jason, is that I left your life." Because he realized he's a drug addict and he would just only destroy that child's life. I left your life, and your mother is the woman that looked after you. So it's not all downhill for women in this episode. There's some really good mothers out there that are single mothers and that have done the right thing. Number three, I digress. Even if we don't want to, the moment we become a parent, our lives serve as an example to our child's life. Yes, it emphasizes that as mothers' love and care are irreplaceable, and that neglecting these duties can have a devastating consequence for both parents and child. Let's take a look at Bob Marley. At 18, Cadella Malcolm married 59-year-old Noble Sinclair Marley, a white Jamaican of English and rumored Syrian Jewish descent, whose father family came from England. The family of his mother, Ellen Marley, nee Bloomfield, came from the Levant. She became pregnant with his son, Robert Nestor, whose second name given, Nestor, means wise messenger. Noble Marley was an officer as well as a plantation overseer. His family applied constant pressure, and when Bob Marley was of a certain age, he approached his father for some money to start his music career. Noble refused, and one of the first songs he wrote was called The Cornerstone. Sorry, people, there's some people coming into the building. Talking about how his father, who didn't didn't see rejected him. His mother wasn't very nurturing either when he was bullied at school for his light complexion, while he had several women, 8 included, and it had a relationship with Rita Marley that seemed to understand everything about his life and understood why he needed to have these amount of women, even though she was the love of his life. She was also the maternal, nurturing mother he never really had, the support system he desperately craved for. Even his children said their father competed with them all the time, and Bob would never let his children win. He always had to win. What an awful thing to do to your children. This stems from not feeling good enough, which is a mother and a parent's obligation to provide their children. Rita was everything. Rita wouldn't have become Bob Marley wouldn't have become Bob Marley without Rita. Let's take a look at the trigger points. Sorry for the interruption, people. Let's take a look at the trigger points. There are quite a couple of trigger points for me. Um, the first trigger point, I want to talk about a mother with substance abuse issues and her daughter. I met these people in Vancouver at the shelter where I was living. Who is this person? Well, it's a white woman with a mixed race child. Very lovely woman, very good, sensitive, caring woman, but has a really, really strong addiction. Her background, she lives in her name, let's call her Teresa. Her background, she lives in Vancouver, Canada. Her situation, she's a beautiful person who's been in abusive relationships that literally beat the self-worth out of her and the self-esteem. She has no self-esteem. A drug addict and has a history of overdoses. I met her at the shelter I was staying in Vancouver. Her daughter, after about 8 months, moved in with her, and what a beautiful looking child. She was very big in her body, fat really, but had the most beautiful face, but was just like her mother. She was just so heavily addicted. And I just honestly, I didn't think it was the right thing for these two people to be sharing a room. I think it just exacerbated the situation for both of them. And one night, her mother overdosed, and her daughter was just running around crying out for help because she was just so desperate. She was just so desperate for her mother to stay alive and to not die in front of her. What an awful experience for this child to have. And a couple of weeks later, she left because she was forced out of the shelter. And then I saw her daughter, and I always was I was nice to her because I just felt so bad for her. And she was a good person. I saw her in the street. She goes, I'll be okay. And the next thing I did, when I saw her, she was in a line at this Carnegie outreach place, a community place, and she was completely drugged up. She was just in a terrible state, and it was awful. And unfortunately, I had the feeling that one of them was going to pass away, and I think it might be the daughter, because she doesn't have the survival skills that her mother does. So there's an example that it really, really triggered me, because her daughter really wanted to get out of being addicted, and she could not. And she desperately felt that being addicted and holding on to her mother's love was the only way to go. But what her mother was doing was not giving her love. She was just showing her the hopeless existence that she had because of battered self-esteem. So that really got to me. The next one is somebody I met when I was in Vancouver again. And apparently he had a very difficult relationship with his mother. He was at one stage training to become a pastor, and he decided not to. I will call him Stephen, who's transgender but considers himself a him, definitely a man, age 41. He's multi-talented, handyman, religious. And the situation with him is that he had a very dysfunctional relationship with his mother and also his father. But I think he's very bitter and angry at his mother. And this bitterness and anger just floods into his relationship with different women. He's married, but he has different relationships with women, and he's incredibly selfish. And I get the feeling that he's also a bit narcissistic in his nature. If he doesn't have the personality disorder, he definitely has some of the behavior mannerisms. And he also had drug addiction problems, which he apparently has kicked. I think he's a good human being, but because he was so severely neglected so much by his mother that he felt it has damaged him in a way. It has damaged his basic relationships. And last but not least, my reflection. Well, my reflections is that I sympathize with the arrested development part of the boy in this story. I was so arrested development when you're raised by a narcissistic mother who was also, she was a single parent. She was a single parent, but she was a narcissist. I wasn't grown and I didn't know how to defend myself because I was too busy being my mother's mother and defending her because she didn't know how to defend herself. She was a child and I was a child. I can really relate to if this boy had grown up in the story, that he would have had a hard time existing in the world because nobody would have helped him mature. And that's how I felt for a really long time. I had to learn how to be the mother and the father to myself and to parent and to nurture myself. And you know something? I am so grateful for that now because it feels fantastic. I don't think I'd want a mother or a father. I'm my mother and my father. I'm my mother and father to my inner child and to the grown woman, and I'm so grateful for that. But it's very difficult. Anyway, we'll finish with today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I appreciate the people that have viewed my podcast and viewed the episodes. I really appreciate it. And I will just leave you with a phrase, and that is healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Sorry for the little interruptions there with noises. It won't happen again. Take care. Goodbye. And don't forget to share, subscribe, and give me a thumbs up. Bye.